Say my name one more time and I'll sue you. It's close to that, right? Isn't that the line from Rocky V?
Yeah.
Am I close?
It's
close.
Yeah, Clubber Lang said that. No, Rocky III.
No, Rocky V with Tommy Morrison. He's on the.
I got to be honest. After Rocky III, I'm not a
Rocky V. Telling you.
Rocky III was the
But
best.
we're not talking about Rocky. We're talking about franchising. Coming up next. I'm going to frame this in a weird way. Not weird way. I'm going to frame it in a way that is comfortable to me. I'm going to give two angles to this, and then Charles, you're going to be much better of an expert than I will. I think about how many times I've bumped into a franchisee or a franchisor down the line where there's some sort of conflict. Now, given in life, there's conflict in traditional marriages, which is why people get divorced, which is probably true with franchise brands. Like if you take a divorce and go all the way back to the I do, you said I do because you thought you were madly in love with this person that was going to be your soulmate, and then flash forward 2, 5, 10, 20 years later and you get a divorce. There's a trigger that you can't go back to that I do. You're far past it. But in franchising, I go back to, I always say this at franchisor, I say, go back to the discovery day. And you said yes. You said yes to this franchisee. Now, what's interesting, I would say 9 out of 10 times when I say go back to that discovery day and think about why you said yes to this franchisee who you now hate, they're like, well, I saw the red flags there. So it's fascinating because, when there's a big fancy check being waved in your face that we're going to sign up with you, maybe that's the sexiness of saying yes to franchising. But I always encourage the franchisor to go back to that moment because it's like, why did you get into such a dark place later on? And so then the last thing I'll say is then I hear, I'm going to sue you, or we need to get a lawsuit, or whatever the threat is at this point. I'm like, man, any legal that I've been associated with in my lifetime, the only people that win are the a-hole Charleses of the world who are like, look at how much money I got, and everybody else is screwed. So there's very rare scenarios where a lawsuit, especially in business, actually turns into something that is beneficial. So I say all this because I think about all the FDDs I reviewed in 2023, and if I saw litigation in there, that concerned me. That means there's an issue at hand. And even conversations where I think the franchisor has twisted the truth in item 19 or set false expectations. And then obviously with franchisees that they get into this thing, they don't follow the system and then they blame the franchisor. So all that mumbo jumbo to the question of what causes lawsuits, what causes franchisee lawsuits. Charles, what's your opinion?
It's a good topic. Let me just set a foundation here, which is everyone perceives franchising as as like litigation prone, or we'll have conversations of, hey, I'm thinking of franchising my business, but I'm worried because lawyers told me there's a lot of litigation. And within context of traditional business activity, if you're growing organically or you're entering into partnerships or joint ventures, realistically, franchising is less litigation prone than other business relationships because there's fundamentals. There's compliance, there's franchise compliance, franchise laws, and there's a lot of repetition in terms of processes. So why do lawsuits happen in the franchise space? Well, first, let's start with, they're not as common as people think they are, thankfully. I will say that 90% of the litigation should never happen. And it is because those, I don't know how to censor myself, a-hole lawyers or litigators that are just going to provoke litigation. So let's say 90% should never happen. And I'm going to say those that shouldn't happen, it's because litigators were overly aggressive. Franchisor didn't have the right mindset. They didn't have a mindset of reconciliation and the greater good of the franchise system. And then there's a 10% where it just has to happen, right? Because someone is just off kilter, whether franchisor or franchisee, they're not doing the right thing. So why do franchisors get sued? Most baseline level, even when it's not their fault, great business, franchisee doing well, but they have a franchise compliance violation, which they didn't register their FDD, they didn't follow their disclosure requirements, and they became a sitting duck for no reason whatsoever, did the right thing, left themselves vulnerable, and now they get taken advantage of. So you have compliance failure, or maybe they did it intentionally. So compliance. Second is, I'll call it misalignment of expectations for financial performance. Let's assume there were no misrepresentations, but you sold a lifestyle supplemental income franchise as if it's a scalable $150,000 legacy building franchise. So you have misalignment of expectations. And now you have someone who's spent considerable funds, had very big expectations, put their livelihood on the line, and now they're sitting in a financial situation where they're hurting, and they're very provoked to go sue the franchisor. And then you have franchisees that just don't do the right thing. And as a franchisor, I don't want to sue. We want to create compliance, but you have to protect the system. I will say this for franchisors out there, and it always we lost a client once or twice because they didn't like that I wasn't being aggressive enough with the franchisee. And my advice was, let's exit them out of the system. Two things: slowly default them and slowly exit them out of the system so there's no conflict, or embrace them so tightly as a franchisor and where they suffocate and they opt out. I don't know if I answered the question. I don't think I did. I just babbled.
But, No, I mean, you're giving insights into it. I mean, like, again, like if I'm pulling out what you said and what I said, like you said 90% of lawsuits shouldn't happen.
They shouldn't. Look, I'll tell you, there's situations where we've had a client, and now we have litigation counsel that we works exclusively with our firm for our clients. They got a litigator. I'm like, hey, client, please let's get on a call, because what your litigator is saying is not going to work. It's going to backfire on you. And then let's set up that call. And then it's set up. But then all of a sudden it's like the client doesn't want to get on, just our litigators. I'm like, that's not worth. And then the litigator is going to pump up the brand. We're going to do this, this, and that. And then after the retainers and after the motions and after people aren't satisfied, then litigator is going to blame, well, your franchise lawyer should have done this and this or planned ahead for that. Like, no, you shouldn't have sued. Or a big thing for franchisors, if your franchisee is defaulting and not paying, do not cut them off out of your point of sale systems. Don't cut them off your technology. Don't create a constructive termination that's going to come back. Treat them as if they're a compliant franchisee until we have a good end point to say we could terminate them. More babbling, but these are big issues.
Well, no, I think they are. I think, like, if I think through what causes, forget about franchising, just anybody in general, it is misaligned expectations is the driver of why someone says, I'll sue you. Now, I don't know what percentage the media is to blame for this, but I've heard my 9-year-old say, I'll sue you. So that means, like, this is ingrained in us. Like, when we're kids, like, we think suing is the solve to everything, which, there's probably false education on that. Like, I'll sue you is a great threat. And I think it happens when people are backed into a corner and they don't know how to defend themselves. Like, it seems like that's the most logical thing. I'm going to get a lawyer and I'm going to sue you. Like, that's the line. But these misaligned expectations, like, I think there's two sides to it from where I stand. One is franchisors that market their item 19 in a way that makes it like this is what you're going to make. And I will say the FSOs are very aggressive right now on flashing these big fancy numbers. I think it's going to bite them in the ass because now you're just selling on these fancy numbers, and now you eliminated the two things that buyers really buy for, and that's the culture of the business, and it's the business construct, the model, not just the end goal. And so when we're selling on things that could take a marathon, but we're presenting it like it's a sprint. Like, I like asking two questions to the franchisors we work with. One is, what's first year sales? Because I think that's a good expectation setter. Like, on average, best case, worst case, average, what are first year sales? And then what is the break even, not necessarily break even as in I've recouped my entire investment, break even, my monthly break even where I'm no longer bleeding cash. Like, when does that tend to occur? Is that at month 1? Is that month 10? Is that 2 years? Because those give such tremendous insight. But when the franchisor goes out there and says 177,000 net earnings, average unit earnings, well, that's fine. But there's a lot of construct that goes into how you get to that number. There's a marketing expense. Like, if you're operating in the state of Utah, taxes are much different than in the city of Chicago. Like, there's so much that goes into that. So the expectations are potentially upside down on day one because we're using these numbers to sell versus the construct of the business and the culture. And I think that's dangerous. And the other thing, when we're talking about job replacement, and I don't have any study on where the bulk of lawsuits come from, but when you're selling on job replacement, or you're using the term job as it relates to being a business owner, like a job you can call in sick. Hey, I'll tell you, I don't call in sick. Even when I'm sick, I'm not calling in sick, because when you're an entrepreneur, there's no more calling in sick. And so if you set the expectation that you always have this out, then I think that creates issues. So that's on work ethic and financials, in my opinion, are the two things that, when those are marketed to sell franchises, not develop franchisees, sell franchises, it sets the story, it sets the opportunity for the story to go sour.
Well, and so, right. So we're at the most fundamental level to every dispute, right? Misalignment of expectations, big factor here in franchising and what you're describing. And then let's add another layer to that, because you're talking about FSOs and things like that. One deal is one deal, but when you have now a lot of commonality of multiple deals and multiple franchisees, and then you have multiple misalignment of expectations, now you have a population of individuals that are all aligned and more likely to sue rather than one off. And that's what lawyers look for. So, so sometimes it could be the franchisor did nothing wrong, but a lot of commonality by a shared pool of franchisees that have bad intentions and a lawyer behind them with bad intentions. As a franchisor, you become an easier target, right? So our emphasis with our clients when we're focused on compliance is, let's do everything we can to make ourselves a more difficult target for franchisee litigation counsel, right? Where do we put spikes and other things that when you come after us, you hurt yourself, or we're not appealing? And now, look, we're focused on coaching and best practices and the right things. But from a legal standpoint, a couple of things that franchisors should be aware of: compliance, smart and strategic franchise agreement structures, where there's definitely things you could do, detail in your franchise agreement, but then other elements. I will say this: we're big believers of, in fact, I got a call today from someone we sent a notice to, and he was looking to speak to me and he was cursing for me. And it's a pre-litigation matter. I said nothing wrong, but apparently they're upset by our letter. But when you have a franchisee, I think you think coaching first, and we have a good framework for how to deal with disputes and what level, but you want to coach first, document. If it takes 3 defaults to terminate someone, you want to have 8. You want to but you also want to give them the opportunity to recoup. But if that can't happen, and we've tried every step possible, the worst thing you could do is be in the middle or indecision.
Yeah.
You need to be hyper aggressive with the litigation. We have one client where franchisee counsel came in and said, we're representing the whole system. Do you want to talk? I'm like, no, I'm not going to talk to you while you're threatening to kill us. And you know what? So we sued the next week, not because I wanted to. And then all of a sudden it's like franchisee saying, hey, I wasn't with them. Well, why is your name in this? And it got resolved right away. But if we went and talked, all they're trying to do is kill the system.
Ultimately, again, like what I was saying at the beginning of this is, if you go back to when the marriage started and you said, I do,
well,
I feel like we need to figure out as humans how to get back to that place. What is our journey back to there, so that at least we can, even if it doesn't work, we
Nick,
can go
it's what
back to
they
the place and
promised.
say it doesn't work. Right.
It's coaching, systems, infrastructure, accountability, right? And a collaboration. So it's all of those things. Now, the one unfortunate thing is all of this is premised on the unit economics need to work. You know, I was speaking to and I could say I was, like Ryan Rayo, who's like brilliant with franchise development, and he said, Charles, what everyone needs to know in the franchising world is the most important thing is your business and unit economics need to work. Start there. Franchise sales is easy once you get that right.
Great. I mean, great statement. I wish all the franchise consultants would talk about business viability before they say, we'll go franchise your damn business.
They don't
Because
no, they don't do that.
no, they go, oh yeah, it's great that you pick up poop out of the inside of toilets that are no longer in use. Franchise it.
I mean, look, I spoke to a business owner. They have a great business. They don't have a consumer website. They don't have I'm like, there's so many fundamentals not here yet. Yeah, no, the consultants, not all of them, many of them.
But okay, but take that inside. Forget about the consultant. Does it mean it's
because
period,
why that's
period,
not an
period.
issue either? Because no one really sells franchises when they, in those cases.
Well, and I don't think there's outlined best practices. Like that's what I think still surprises me about franchising in general. So, and you and I have talked about this, but we've talked about like the commission side, right? On real estate transactions, the buyer's agent gets something, the seller's agent gets something. There's stricter, not impossible, like a dum-dum can become a real estate agent. So it's not like it's hard, but there's a restrictive certification that you have to be to be an agent. Like there's some best practices associated with it, and then there's a digest, MLS, Zillow, Redfin, that gives transparency into what's on the marketplace, which then gives the buyer some tools to be educated too. Like if you look at real estate as a transactional thing, it is really sound. Now, franchising will never have the number of transactions on an annual basis that would happen in real estate. So it's not like it could get there tomorrow, but the construct of best practices is what we're talking about, and there aren't any. That goes from, is this business actually viable? Nobody's looking at that from a proof of concept. I looked at an FDD yesterday that has lies in it that unfortunately now I'm talking with a franchisee that's in a mess, but there are inaccurate data points in this FDD. Did the big fancy law firm do checks and balance on it? No, there's no construct to do checks and balances. Like they're taking the word of the franchisor that this is the real information. And so you look at all these holes. Ultimately, for the franchisee, you know yourself. You go through the worst case scenario. The Annie Duke conversation that Charles and I had during COVID, I still think about it. She talked about backcasting. So you go to the worst case scenario and you go to the best case scenario. In the worst case scenario, ask yourself, what would I have done differently? So you're thinking about buying a franchise, go into a situation where it didn't work. And now write down all the questions that you need to get solved before you say yes. You go to that scenario and it worked great, but it could have worked better. What would you have done? Would you have spent more money on marketing? Would you bought more units? Would you have scaled? I think it's such a powerful tool that it's not going to prevent you from getting into a lawsuit. It's not going to stop any of that, but it's such a good exercise to get there, because if you're going into a franchise and you're like, if I don't do this, if I don't do these numbers, I'm going to be pissed. And the franchise sales guy's like, of course you're going to do those numbers. Look at our fancy item 19.
But Nick, also too, and again, I represent franchisors, but hey, franchisee, like you're a big boy and girl, like, you need to be accountable, and you need to understand you need to work your whatever off and make this happen too. You just don't sit back. I mean, if you compare, again, anyone who's saying, oh, statistics show franchise business more successful, I would challenge whether or not that's true or not. But business in general is risky. So
Yes.
there's hardworking businesses every day that fail. So, I think the best advice for the franchisee, in addition to all the due diligence and the backcasting and everything else, understand maybe this franchisor gives you an advantage, but you better be ready to gear up. Good franchisors, like I see our clients, they have book clubs. They read like Napoleon Hill in a book club with their franchisees, EOS and Traction. Like, it's not static. You're on a journey of improving yourself and learning business and growing, and you're buying into a widget, and you want to be with the right leadership team. But now you better gear up too, and grow with this.
Our good friend Simon, always here to put in the commentary. Should you go harder when it's a post-termination non-compete issue?
I think so, Simon. As long as everything was drafted rationally and you think it's enforceable, I think so. My answer is yes. And the reason why is I don't like litigation and I don't like that conflict, but I view going after the post-termination non-compete as protecting the franchisees that remain in my system. So I look at that as an obligation to protect my franchisees and the system itself.
Yeah, I think the two important insights are successful franchisees make you more money, and you always protect your club.
Yeah.
As long as they're in your club, every decision that you make has to be designed to drive more sales back for them. And that's it. Simple. All right, Charles, I'm not going to sue you yet. Maybe someday. We've been close.
Rocky 3 was the best Rocky movie ever.
And for the record, yes, I did encourage you to become the water monster, but I did not make you do it. So therefore you can't sue me.